All righty, good morning. Welcome to our town meeting program for Friday, March 27th. And we've got a big stack of stuff to go over, so we're going to jump in and do that here. First, our thanks to the sponsor of the show. That would be Cordova Wireless Communications, your local cell phone provider, which is providing your local talk show. Would point out again, too, that their sister organization there, Cordova Telephone Cooperative, has expanded internet offerings, making some things free, making other expanded offerings available, and that's worth looking into since internet is very important in these pandemic times. So you can visit ctcak.net to learn more about CTC and Cordova Wireless, and we very much appreciate their continued support of local radio, particularly in this case so we can do town meeting. And I would give you an overview of the agenda if it wouldn't take half the show to do so. We're going to cover state and local information and start out here by trying to help provide some clarity on what seems to be the most confusing issue for folks as far as the chatter, what's being shared on local Facebook pages and pictures that are being shared back and forth, and people giving each other advice, and in some cases, there's understandably some confusion over what is expected of people coming into Cordova traveling by air. And this is going to also, involve people bringing their boats in later, but people coming into Cordova from outside Cordova, and what are the rules and what are the expectations? What makes it kind of confusing is that we're under sort of two sets of rules, one from the city and one from the state. The good news is that the two mandates are largely the same in terms of what people should do. The primary difference, is that there's some pretty significant punishment for violating the state's rules, whereas, at least at the time we're doing this show, there isn't a stated penalty if you don't quarantine according to the city's rules. And by the way, the primary difference between the city's rules and the state's rules, and again, keeping in mind the state is the one that can fine somebody $25,000 and or put them in jail for up to a year. That's for violating the state's rules. And what the state is saying is that if you come into Alaska from somewhere else and don't follow the quarantine protocol, then you face those fines and so forth. Cordova's rules basically say the same thing, except that Cordova's protocol applies to anyone coming into Cordova from anywhere, including other cities in the state. The state has not banned travel between cities within Alaska, and traveling between cities in Alaska is not punishable by the $25,000 or 1 year in jail. Again, I haven't heard anything from the city, and they may be working on that as we speak, but I haven't heard anything about if there is a punishment or a consequence for folks who come into Cordova from anywhere, from another city, specifically in Alaska, and don't follow the protocol. They may be planning something like that again. But what's been happening is there have been, there's some anecdotal chatter where we have Cordovans thinking that people that have come into Cordova from another city in Alaska, say Anchorage, which is, kind of the hot spot because it's the biggest city for COVID-19 in Alaska. So if somebody comes to Cordova from Anchorage and doesn't quarantine like the city says they should, then that person is liable for a $25,000 fine and a year in jail. And that's not true. The only people that can be fined the $25,000 and or receive up to a year in jail right now are people coming into Alaska from outside Alaska. Those fines and jail punishments don't apply to people traveling between cities in the state. Now, that being said, what's being asked of travelers by the city and the state is fairly similar in terms of behavior. And we're going to go over that now using some documents, a couple of them, that were put out by the Cordova Prepared folks. Again, this is this alliance of CCMC and Alanka and the Cordova Prepared team and the city who are jointly sort of working together to get everybody on the same page. And the city, of course, is acknowledging, that there's confusion between these two travel mandates. So we'll see if we can clear some of that up here this morning. Using an FAQ that was put out by the state, and we'll use that as guidance for what the state expects of us and then how it also applies to what the city expects. So when Cordova Prepared put these documents out, they did it with this caption: "Do you have questions about the state's recent mandate requiring 14-day self-quarantine for all travelers arriving into Alaska? Check out this helpful FAQ from the state of Alaska on Health Mandate 10. Now, that's the one where the state imposed the 14-day quarantine and the penalties for violating. The city then goes on to say here, "We are working on an FAQ like this for Cordova Health Mandate 1, which similarly requires a 14-day self-isolation for all entering Cordova, including those arriving from areas within the state. If you have questions you'd like included, email them to cordovaprepared@yahoo.com. And again, I haven't heard that this FAQ, at the time of this show, I haven't heard that this city FAQ is complete. So they're still working on it. And if you have a question after hearing this show or just in general, then again, cordovaprepared@yahoo.com is the key address. So again, prefacing, the state requirement is a 14-day self-quarantine for anybody coming into Alaska from somewhere not Alaska, and that's punishable by the big fine and the jail time. The city health mandate is the same concept, but applied to anyone coming into Cordova from anywhere. The state doesn't prevent city-to-city travel so far. Cordova does prevent city-to-city travel without self-quarantine. I mean, you need to quarantine after you come into Cordova, but as far as there being a punishment, I haven't seen one, so we'll see how that goes. So now getting into frequently asked questions about the COVID-19 health mandates at the state level. Health Mandate 10.1, international and interstate travel, was an order for self-quarantine. Went into effect March 25th, will be reevaluated April 21st. You can find the full text of it by going to coronavirus.alaska.gov if you want to take a look. Question: what does Health Mandate 10.1 mean, and what is its purpose? Again, this is the state one, not the local one, but many of these things will apply to local quarantining. So what does it mean? Health Mandate 10.1 has been implemented to help control the entry into Alaska from areas outside the state to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. All people arriving in Alaska, whether resident, worker, or visitor, are required to self-quarantine for 14 days and monitor for illness. Arriving residents and workers in self-quarantine should work from home unless they support critical infrastructure. And by the way, there's a big document you can get from coronavirus.alaska.gov that shows what all the critical infrastructure is. And commercial fishing is one of those. But if you are going to work in critical infrastructure, your employer, which is yourself, if you're self-employed, or the senior officials at your company, are supposed to have a plan for you to participate safely in that critical infrastructure. So again, it's worth taking a look at that list, because there are, and see, there's sort of another aside here. There are different behaviors expected for people who have symptoms of sickness and how they're supposed to behave compared to people who don't necessarily have symptoms but have just traveled. People who are showing symptoms of being ill are pretty much supposed to stay home no matter what, critical infrastructure or not. If you're sick, you stay home, period. If you're not showing symptoms and work in critical infrastructure, then you are not only allowed to work, but the officials hope that you will be able to work, provided you are following your employer's guidance for social distancing and sanitizing and so forth. And I mean, obviously, this is challenging. It's hard for anybody to get their head around, but once you're able to make these distinctions, it makes things make a little bit more sense. If you're sick, you stay home, you don't work, period. Traveling or not traveling. If you have traveled, though, and are not showing symptoms, then you're required to self-quarantine for 14 days and monitor for illness unless you're in one of these critical infrastructure areas, which we went over in a previous show. We're not going to go over all of them again, but you can download those. Now, in terms of the text of the actual state travel mandate, what does that say? Answer is, all people arriving in Alaska, whether resident, worker, or visitor, are required to self-quarantine for 14 days and monitor for illness. Arriving residents and workers in self-quarantine should work from home unless you support critical infrastructure. So that sort of restates what was said there before, but that's the actual text of the mandate. And Cordova's rules are very similar to that. But again, Cordova's rules apply to anybody flying in from anywhere, including other Alaskan cities. Question: how will this be tracked? Answer is, travelers arriving in Alaska will fill out a declaration form at the airport and in the future at border crossing when they arrive and indicate where they will be self-quarantining for 14 days. And as an aside, this is where that penalty thing comes in. You know, people are wondering how it's going to be enforced, and the authorities will have those documents that you fill out when you come into the state from somewhere outside the state. And if you're found to be violating what you said you were going to do on your declaration, that's when the fines and the possible jail time kick in. Again, at the state level. The concept is the same locally, just without the paperwork, and I don't know yet locally what's going to be done as far as enforcement. That's still being figured out, by the way. Next question. What should a traveler do immediately upon arriving in Alaska? Anyone arriving in Alaska should go directly from the airport to the designated quarantine location they identified on the mandatory State of Alaska travel declaration form. What the city would like you to do is that exact same thing, but I don't think there's any paperwork for it yet. So again, same concept for both. Question: I don't have any symptoms. Do I have to self-quarantine? Answer: all people arriving in Alaska, regardless of their perceived health, whether resident, worker, or visitor, are required to self-quarantine for 14 days and monitor for illness. Arriving residents and workers in self-quarantine should work from home unless they support critical infrastructure, as defined by that state document we mentioned. While in quarantine, you should monitor for symptoms according to health guidance from the CDC and State of Alaska. That, again, is virtually identical to what the city would like. Question: can I quarantine at home? Answer: yes, if you're an Alaska resident. Your designated quarantine location is your residence. Next question: what if I'm visiting? Answer to that: if you are a visitor or worker, your designated quarantine location is your hotel room or rented lodging. And again, those two pieces of guidance are the same as the city's guidance. Some people have asked about quarantining on boats. I don't really know about that. I haven't seen anything official about it. But if we do see some official documentation, because I don't want to speculate, that just adds to the confusion. But if some official documentation comes out on that, we'll be sure to pass it along. Next question from the state. How long does the mandate last? At the state level, they say it will be reevaluated on April 21st of 2020. I don't know if that same date applies to the city or not. We'll let you know if they make an announcement about that. Next question. What happens if someone doesn't follow this mandate? Answer is failure to follow this order is punishable by a fine of up to $25,000 or imprisonment of not more than 1 year, both pursuant to Alaska statute. Now, this is a big difference. This item right here is a difference between the city rules and state rules. The state, if you come in from out of state, you are liable for these penalties if you violate. But people say coming to Cordova from Anchorage, you can't, look at somebody on the street and threaten them. Hey, you need to get out of the store because I know you just came in from Anchorage. You need to get out of here, or I'm going to turn you in and you're going to be fined $25,000 and thrown in jail. That's not accurate. And by the way, really not how we should be treating each other anyway. There are nicer ways to try to apply appropriate social pressure than pitchforks. But that, again, is a key difference and is confusing because people are seeing overlap between these. People flying from Anchorage to Cordova, Fairbanks to Cordova, Ketchikan to Cordova are not under the threat of these fines and jail penalties. But people coming into Cordova from other places really should behave as if they were threatened with those fines and penalties, because that's what the city is asking. There just isn't a specific punishment that's been dictated for violating it. Still be good to follow the spirit of it, though. Next question. If I know a business or individual that isn't following this mandate, who should I report this to? They give an email address. Violations may be reported to investigations@alaska.gov. But let's emphasize again, Cordovans should not be reporting people who came here from Anchorage or Fairbanks or Ketchikan or wherever to this email address, because that doesn't apply. The violations they're talking about in the state rules only apply to people that came into Alaska from outside Alaska. Next question. How long do I have to stay in quarantine? Answer, you should stay at your designated location for 14 days or until you leave the state if that's less than 14 days. Next question. If I'm sick, may I go to the doctor? Answer at the state level is yes. You may leave your designated quarantine location only for medical emergencies or to seek medical care. Please call your doctor before going to their office or facility. And this is dead on exactly the same as what the city would like and our medical facilities. They don't mind having you come in, but they very much want you to call first. So obviously the personnel at the medical facility can put on their protective gear and be ready to receive you and take care of you without making themselves sick or passing it on to others. Next question. Can I go to meetings or exercise areas if I'm in quarantine? The answer is do not visit any public spaces, including pools, meeting rooms, fitness centers, restaurants, and more. Once again, total harmony between the state and city on that one. May I have visitors at my quarantine location? The answer to that, no visitors are allowed other than doctors, healthcare providers, or other critical infrastructure service providers, as detailed in that big old list the state has. Again, if you want to see that list, go to coronavirus.alaska.gov. And here again, this is the same guidance for both the city and the state. Question, what if someone is living with me at my quarantine location? This is another one that's had people wondering locally. Answer is, if someone else is at your location, you need to comply with social distancing guidelines, including remaining at least 6 feet away from others and frequently cleaning services. If you need help accessing food, please contact your local jurisdiction to request help. By the way, Cordova is rocking it on this. All kinds of people willing to help out, shopping, getting your prescriptions, doing that kind of thing while you're in quarantine. Cordova Neighborhood Watch Facebook page is a good place for that. And you could probably contact the Cordova Prepared folks, too. They're cordovaprepared@yahoo.com. And they can provide you some guidance. Next question. If I can't leave, how do I get food at my quarantine location? Answer. Many grocery stores deliver food, and delivery services can bring food from restaurants, all of which can be dropped off outside the door to prevent contact. And that, again, is something that local authorities and local citizens would like everybody to do as well. When you're in, and here again, at the state level, it's for people coming in from outside Alaska. At the local level, the same concept applies to anybody coming from anywhere. And there's lots of assistance to help make that work. Question. Some travelers and businesses providing critical infrastructure are exempted. What is considered critical infrastructure? The answer, a variety of professions and businesses support critical infrastructure, including healthcare, first responders, financial institutions, media, and more. The full list is available at coronavirus.alaska.gov. Now, again, that's for people who are under mandatory quarantine from travel. The critical infrastructure thing does not apply to people who are sick. Obviously sick. If you are obviously sick, you're supposed to be completely out of circulation. If you're not obviously sick but have traveled, then the critical infrastructure thing applies. And again, you can take a look at that list. Question. What should you do if your business or employees support critical infrastructure and you have travelers coming in from out of state? Answer. If your business is included in the critical infrastructure list, again, you can get that from coronavirus.alaska.gov. If your business is included and your workers must travel to enter Alaska, you need to submit a plan or protocol for maintaining critical infrastructure to the Department of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development, outlining how you will avoid the spread of COVID-19 and not endanger the lives of the communities in which you operate, of others who serve as part of that infrastructure, or the ability of that critical infrastructure to function. Now, there was a deadline of 3 p.m. March 24th, but plans can still be submitted to Alaska Development at alaska.gov. So that's another important part of the whole, the confusion. Because sometimes there's been chatter about, well, I'm part of critical infrastructure, so I can do whatever I want whenever I want. I'm exempted from quarantining and all that. No, that's not true at all. You are exempted from quarantining, A, if you're not sick, and B, when you are doing things in support of that critical infrastructure with a plan in place. It's not a free pass to just go anywhere, do anything, that kind of deal. It means you don't get busted for being out of your home as long as you are complying in the ways that your employer has said that you need to. And all critical infrastructure employers are supposed to have a plan in place. Now, they give some examples under this heading of what critical infrastructure businesses should do and how things work with employees. Here's one example they give. What if a telecommunications provider is wondering if it needs to enforce quarantine requirements on its in-state employees who have been on vacation out of the state and are now returning, because communications providers have been deemed essential critical infrastructure? The answer is the provider or the company needs to submit their business implementation plan to Alaska Development at alaska.gov. That plan should articulate how the company is protecting workers and customers with respect to the mandate and guidance for quarantine and social distancing. If the employee can't follow the company guidance and recommendations for social distancing, the state suggests the company have that employee stay at home. And that harmonizes with what the city has been saying about people coming into Cordova from anywhere. They'd like our businesses to do basically that same thing. Another example listed in the state document. I work for a moving company. I drive across the border frequently, but I'm alone in my truck. Do I still have to quarantine for 14 days after arriving in Alaska? The answer is no. Moving and trucking companies are considered critical infrastructure, but they are asked to have a mitigation plan on how to avoid the public and help to prevent the spread of COVID-19. That plan should be submitted to Alaska Development at alaska.gov. Another example, what if someone is traveling back to their home from out of state but have a stopover in another community on their way home? What does that person need to do? The answer is transient accommodations, including temporary lodging at the stopover location at a hotel, is permissible. The same applies for those travelers with overnights due to weather or other extenuating circumstances on their journey home. That's one that's not likely to apply locally as much, but because the city would like everybody to basically follow those rules, again, coming in from any community. Another example, if someone is traveling back to a village but stopping in Anchorage, does that person need to quarantine in both communities? The answer is the person traveling must quarantine when they arrive at their home or employee lodging at the final destination. This person does not need to quarantine in Anchorage. Travelers should state the final destination, not intermediary destinations. Honestly, to me, that seems a little loopholey, but that's the state guidance. And again, what the city is asking is, even if you had that stopover in Anchorage that might be okay with the state, the city would like you to behave in Cordova as if you came in from out of state. Hopefully that's becoming increasingly clear as we go over this. Another interesting question. What if my critical infrastructure, business, or operation relies on outside travelers, but they won't be entering Alaska prior to April 21st? Do I have to submit a plan? The state's answer is no on that, because this guidance that they have goes to April 21st. If they have to extend it, they'll probably put out another one and change that date. Now, here is another big differentiation between the state and the city. This question is, I've been traveling to various communities within Alaska. Does this state mandate impact me? The state says, at this time, travel within the state of Alaska is not restricted by this mandate, though public health guidance calls for avoiding non-essential in-state trips. So remember earlier we were talking about the $25,000 in the jail time at the state level doesn't apply to people going city to city. Cordova, though, the city of Cordova, would like people doing interstate travel to behave as if they came from another state or another country. I don't know that there's a penalty for it. I haven't heard that there is. But this is a difference between the state guidance and the local guidance. So Cordova's policy would be at odds with this piece of the state policy. For good reason. Because we're isolated, we've got very few medical care professionals, and so it's a good argument that we should be more cautious. Now, something that may be of interest to our Coast Guard folks. Again, at the state level, the question is, my spouse is in the military and will be arriving in Alaska. Does this impact traveling military personnel? Answer, all people arriving in Alaska, whether resident, worker, or visitor, are required to self-quarantine for 14 days and monitor for illness. Arriving residents and workers in self-quarantine should work from home unless they support critical infrastructure, which again is in that document on the state site. Next question. I'm in the military and my dependents will be arriving in Alaska. How does this impact military dependents? And the answer to that is the same as the one before. Quarantine, work from home, unless you support critical infrastructure. And P.S., and unless you're showing symptoms. If you're showing symptoms, you shouldn't be out around people at all. Critical infrastructure, no, if you're sick. Now, this is an interesting one. Will the mandatory declaration form be collected at the highway border as well as airports? What state agency will be collecting the declaration forms at the airports, and will they be given to municipalities and or law enforcement agencies? What will be done with the forms? Are they public records? So the answer to all of those is forms are being collected at drop boxes at the Ted Stevens International Airport in Anchorage and Fairbanks International Airport in Fairbanks. For travelers to Juneau, forms will be collected by the city and Borough of Juneau employees. All forms will be collected and provided to the State of Alaska Department of Health and Social Services staff in all locations and will be secured and stored with DHSS. They will not be given to municipalities or any local, state, or federal law enforcement agencies. If in the future a misdemeanor criminal investigation is ongoing, law enforcement will request specific documentation for evidence from the department, which will be processed in the customary way documentation is provided during criminal investigations, assuring protocols for chain of custody are applied. The state of Alaska is developing the procedures and collection protocols for forms at land border crossings. The same protocols will apply for collection and preservation. Now, I have to confess, I don't know if anybody coming into the Cordova airport is being told to fill out these forms or not. It's kind of irrelevant for the city, really, because the city, A, wants everybody, no matter where you're coming from, to self-quarantine for 14 days after coming into Cordova, and B, there isn't a punishment structure exactly. It's still honor system, as far as I know at this point. So that's the end of that FAQ document, and, to try to boil it down to the summary, the advice that's being given by the state and the city in terms of what people can do to protect the community is largely the same. It's just that the state has some pretty extensive punishment if you violate it and are caught violating it, whereas the city, as far as I know at this point, doesn't. But, should it really take that for us to do the right thing? On the flip side, though, it is important for locals to understand the differences and to not go around again with pitchforks threatening each other with you get off the street, or I'm going to tattle and I'm going to tell somebody and you're going to get fined $25,000. Well, that isn't necessarily the case. It would be if the person had just come in from Seattle or Oregon or something like that, I suppose. And one other thing, in terms of people pitchforking each other, there's been some anecdotal chatter about nobody should be outside at all, period, which is not only inaccurate, but goes against what the doctors are saying. The medical professionals are saying that some time outside is actually good for you while you're quarantining to get some fresh air. Just don't get within 6 feet of anybody. And don't be in public places. When you're under quarantine, you're not supposed to be in a public place. But taking a walk, doing a little yard work with nobody around, and that's the critical thing. That's where people got to be smart. The social distancing, minimum of 6 feet away from anybody else. But being outside is not is not a behavior that people should be picking on each other about. Just being outside, minding your own business, staying at least 6 feet away from other people. So let's be sure, if we're trying to offer community guidance to one another, that we're doing it based on facts and truth. Being quarantined doesn't mean you can't step out into your yard and get some fresh air or walk around. Just don't get close to other people at all. You're listening to the Town Meeting Program for Friday, March 27th. I know that that was a lot of words, and I'm sorry if it's terribly boring, but we're trying to get all the information out there. If you want to hear it again, want to hear it slower, want to be able to pause to think about it, this whole thing's going to go on our Facebook page, not Facebook page, but YouTube channel that Robbie calls Cordova TV. It's youtube.com/Cordova TV. You can hear this and all our other archived shows. And we did one on the big list of critical infrastructure. If you want to hear that, or again, just go to coronavirus.alaska.gov and you can find that attachment. They call it Attachment A, that shows what all the critical infrastructure is. And people that, if they're not sick, can still participate in taking care of business. Now, on to other news. 10 new cases of COVID-19 detected yesterday, or announced yesterday. It was 17 the previous day, so having fewer of them is a nice break from the uptick. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. 5 new people in Anchorage, 2 in Fairbanks, 2 in North Pole, 1 in Juneau, which brings Alaska's total case count to 69 as of yesterday's press conference. Most of the individuals are adults. 2 of them are on the younger side, age 19 to 29, and the first child tested positive. Child apparently a relative of a previously diagnosed case and the first known youth to be infected with the virus. Dr. Joe McLaughlin, the state's epidemiologist, said, "We now have convincing evidence of community transmission in 3 Alaska communities, Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Ketchikan, which means that COVID-19 cases are being identified in people in these communities who have had no recent out-of-state travel and no identified link to another person with confirmed COVID-19 infection." So what does all of that mean? It's absolutely essential, if we don't want it to spread in Alaska, for people to keep doing social distancing and prompt home isolation immediately for anyone who develops any symptoms of respiratory infection. They reference again coronavirus.alaska.gov if you would like to look at the announcements and all the official documentation that's been put out by the state. At the local level, yesterday's news release from the city, fortunately, our confirmed positive case count remains at 0. The city reminds us that it's important to remember that young people and young adults can contract the virus, and the symptoms can be very mild, especially in younger, healthier patients, but they can easily pass it to the more vulnerable populations. City also says it's important to note that this virus can be shedding, as it's called, or contagious in patients before they are symptomatic, which is why social distancing is incredibly important, whether you've been traveling or not. Because, again, this can jump from, it's happening in Alaska. It can jump from person to person, obviously. And so everybody, travel, no travel, whatever, should be social distancing. News release goes on to say, the contagiousness of the virus underscores the importance of the CDC social distancing guidelines of at least 6 feet, which should be followed by all Cordovans, even those who do not feel sick. And self-isolation for Cordova's elderly and high-risk populations, as well as those who have entered Cordova within the last 14 days. As the State of Alaska Chief Medical Officer Ann Zink continues to state, the citizens of Alaska hold the future very much in their own hands. How you choose to follow these mitigation measures now will help determine how long these measures must stay in place, how many Alaskans become infected, how many hospitals are overwhelmed, and how many people eventually succumb to this disease. Zink said, "Really, right now, this is a call to action to all Alaskans. I can't underestimate and I can't overstate the importance of slowing down. The more we do now, the more we flatten that curve, and it's just critical." And this is a good point to meditate on for a sec. People who don't help flatten the curve are prolonging how long these mitigation measures have to remain in place. The more people that do help flatten the curve, the shorter, potentially, these more, I don't want to say draconian, but these more aggressive measures will have to remain in place. So if the idea is to make it so life can resume to normal as soon as possible, then making it as unnormal as possible right now is the key to that. Sacrifice now to benefit later. Anybody behaving in a short-term mindset is just going to make this whole thing take longer and get worse. That's what the state and local officials are saying. City manager in this document also urges Cordovans to take the mitigation measures seriously. City manager said, quote, "Cordova does not yet have a confirmed positive COVID-19 case. Let's keep it that way. Every person in town is responsible for doing their part and protecting themselves and others. If we do, already have confirmed cases. Cordovans have also had a number of questions about testing, excuse me, and the latest news release from the city says while there are still no confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Cordova, testing is taking place and is available for those that fit the CDC testing criteria at Cordova Community Medical Center and Alanca Community Health Center. In a community as small and close-knit as Cordova, the City of Cordova's COVID-19 incident management team feels it is best to not reveal the exact number of individuals tested at this time to protect patient privacy. Any test which comes back positive for COVID-19 in Cordova will be reported to the public immediately. Now, if you have any questions about that, and there have been some people who have said they're uncomfortable with it, which I'm not sure why, because it doesn't really change anything one way or the other in terms of how we behave. But any questions about that, cordovaprepared@yahoo.com would be a good email address to use. Now, on to an announcement that just came out, when? Yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. From the schools regarding Cordova School District food service programs. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which facilitates the National Child Nutrition Programs, has issued a nationwide waiver permitting the distribution of meals during COVID-19, which allows parents to take meals home on behalf of their children. Typically, children and students must be physically present and consume meals on school grounds as part of federal food service programs. However, the waiver removes this component of the requirement. Beginning Tuesday, March 31st, last day of this month, grab-and-go meals will be available for pickup at Mount Eccles Elementary School's main entrance between the hours of 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. At that time, parents, guardians, and/or students may pick up 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches for each child in your household. Food service staff will be there during this time to welcome people, tally meals, answer questions, and assist as needed. Grab-and-go meals will be placed in bags on a convenient self-serve table just outside the main doors. Each bag will contain 1 ready-to-heat meal, lunch meats, cheese, bread for 4 meals, as well as 5 fruits, 5 vegetables, 5 milks for lunches, and 5 complete breakfasts. Food service staff will monitor the distribution and check off children's names on a meal roster, similar to their regular routine during the school day. Please follow the process listed, which I'll go over here. They ask that you follow the process to help maintain health and safety standards for all. So what they're asking is, families whose last names start with A through K, your pickup time is 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. every Tuesday. And again, that's beginning next Tuesday, the 31st. A through K, pickup from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Families whose last names start with L through Z, pickup time is 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. every Tuesday. Meals are available for any child ages 0 to 18, including those who are not Cordova School District students and families. They ask that you approach the main doors from the upper staircase, pick up the meals, and exit foot traffic toward the harbor. They emphasize maintaining at least 6 feet from others if we are waiting in line, and there's no public access to the building for any reason. And by the way, if you want to see a diagram of the getting in and out, I'm sure they'll be directing people when they start this, but there's a diagram if you go to the Cordova Prepared Facebook page. It might be on the city page too or the school page, but I know for sure it's on Cordova Prepared to show you how to enter and how to exit. And again, this all happens outside the building. If you're facing the building, looks like you kind of come in from the right toward the main doors, grab your supplies, and then exit to the left of that main outdoor staircase. So they just so nobody doubles back. It just flows through. And it should be pretty easy to maintain the 6 feet of distance. Sandy's announcement concludes by saying, we will continue to keep you informed with any updates to the Grab and Go Meals program on our webpage and on social media. Food distribution days, again, will be every Tuesday till further notice and may be subject to change based on state and local health mandates. So how about our school folks trying to make sure those meals still get out there? Well done. Here's another little something to think about, since we're all spending more time at home and dealing with wipes and paper towels and so forth. The city of Cordova asks residents to please stop flushing disinfecting wipes, gloves, paper towels, and other similar materials down the toilet. These items don't disintegrate like toilet paper and can clog pipes, causing sewer lines to actually break, and it'll put a strain on the wastewater treatment facility. Remember, toilet paper and human waste are all that goes into the toilet. That's it. The city urges the public to put any wipes, whether it's baby wipes, facial wipes, cleaning wipes, latex gloves, paper towels, napkins, and tissues in the trash, not in the toilet, please. Because who needs a ruptured sewer line on top of everything else we're going through? And finally, we'll end on some good news here. Something kind of fun. A lot of what comes out of the state is problematic. This is some good state news. Alaska Sea Life Center offers virtual visits during the closure. Sea Life Center, of course, is closed because of COVID-19, but they're offering free virtual visits so the public can explore and experience and learn more about Alaska's marine wildlife online. What a neat thing to maybe do with the kids who aren't going to school. They say their education department will present live daily programs on YouTube at 12 p.m. and 2 p.m., 7 days a week. You can visit the virtual classroom to learn about Alaska's marine ecosystem and the Alaskan mammals they house. Past programs can be accessed from their YouTube channel for the Alaska Sea Life Center. They say they'll also stream live webcam from one of their aquariums on YouTube from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And the content will change daily, but you might get to see, watch in real time the puffins swimming underwater, seals, stellar sea lions, relax with the moon jellies, and just sit there and enjoy watching that on your computer. They say also to watch their website and Facebook page for announcements of special Facebook Live events. Their staff will introduce you to resident animals, teach you about the different flora and fauna they house, and take you behind the scenes. So Alaska Sea Life Center making itself fully open and available to your computer, and their website is alaskasealife.org. Well, congratulations if you've sat through this entire thing. We hope it was informative. I know it's a lot of words, but we always like to try to get as much information out there as possible and try and collate it, and particularly with these kind of confusing situations involving travel, do what we can to help it all make sense, because, of course, we get all the firsthand vetted information. So part of what we're able to do in our analysis is put it together. I mean, basically, again, travel, no travel, the idea overall is just to stay apart as much as possible, because that's really the way to clamp down on it. Take advantage of the delivery services. Don't go out and get things unless it's absolutely necessary, because that's what really puts you at risk and what puts other people at risk too, because it's not just about any of us not catching it for ourselves. It's about us not carrying it around and giving it to other people. Again, we expect some guidance from the city, as sort of a frequently asked questions from the city at some point soon, which, of course, we'll get out to you regarding travelers coming in. But overall, the philosophy between the state plan and the city plan regarding travelers, the behaviors that they're asking for are the same. The differences are that the state has the ability to fine people and put them in jail for violating it. The city might also, I don't know, but nothing has been released about that yet as of this recording. But I mean, you can stress yourself out trying to figure out all the ins and outs and details. Basically, if everybody just stays isolated, doesn't move around any more than necessary, that's us doing our best to not spread this around. And then again, if you see someone out engaging in a behavior that concerns you, there's no reason not to see if they know about what the rules are. But no, let's not pitchfork each other, because that doesn't add to the quality of life in the community either. Obviously, we don't want this thing to spread. We'd love it if it didn't show up at all. But, if any of us get really panicky and start, spewing a lot of kind of hateful accusations at people, and again, a great example is someone just out taking a walk, which is not only allowed but encouraged by the medical people, as long as you're 6 feet away from people. If you're driving down the street and you see someone out taking a walk and you roll your window down and say, "Hey, what are you doing out here? Get back home. You're putting people at risk." Well, you're wrong. That's not based on fact. That's based on, whatever somebody's making up in their head. Even people that are under quarantine can be out in their yard or spending some time outside in a non-public place now, not going where people congregate. That's very, very bad. But being outside alone with nobody around you, not touching things, that sort of stuff, that's not illegal at the local or state level. And the doctors say people need that so they don't go nuts and get depressed and end up, with other side effects. So again, be kind, be smart. The more of us that do that, the better we're going to do. And with that, we close out our town meeting program. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Cordova Wireless Communications for the sponsorship. Take a look at the extra benefits being offered by CTC for internet use. That's probably at ctcak.net, I would think. Hope everybody has a good weekend, and we'll get all of our missed programming made up and programmed here on AM 1450 KLAM in Cordova.